Welcome to A2Council Update, a recap of the Ann Arbor City Council meeting on January 22, 2024. This meeting included comments and discussion about rezoning 127 acres at Plymouth Road for a transit corridor district, expanding permitted uses in mixed-use and office zoning districts, allowing ground-mounted solar panels in residential front and backyards, approving a development agreement for 121 Catherine Street, prohibiting city contractors from asking job applicants about criminal records, and hiring a new executive director for the Downtown Development Authority. This is the voting chart for the council meeting on January 22, 2024. All agenda items were approved unanimously. Council members Dharma Akman and Cynthia Harrison were absent. For Akman, this was her fourth absence. For Harrison, this was her third absence. You can find this voting chart and more information about this meeting at A2Council.com. Like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this. The meeting included a presentation from the Downtown Development Authority, which manages and maintains city parking downtown.
We're now operating at about 75% of the revenue that was received pre-pandemic. Our expenditures, we deferred about $10 to $12 million of expenditures during that 3-year period of uncertainty. So our hourly rates in our parking structures are right now $1.20 an hour. They would be raised to $1.50 an hour. Our on-street meter rates are currently at $2.20 an hour. They would be increased to $2.40 an hour. On the permit side, our standard monthly permit will be increased by $25. So we're going from $200 to $225. In February, the DDA will be holding a public hearing. That's February 7th. In March, the DDA board will vote on this 3-year slate of rate increases. And if approved, we will implement these new rates on May 1st.
After introductory remarks, public comments, and staff explanations, council discussed agenda items for less than 40 minutes. 8 people signed up in advance to offer public comments. 4 people spoke to topics on the agenda. The consent agenda this week included 8 items and expenditures totaling nearly $9 million. The consent agenda was approved unanimously. 1 item was pulled for discussion. Council considered a development agreement for the Ann Arbor Housing Commission to build 63 units of affordable housing at 121 Catherine Street in Carytown. In 2019, a previous council designated this property for the development of affordable housing. The development will be 6 stories with 18 parking spaces. This week, council made statements in support for about 5 minutes.
The ground floor of this building will have some retail space as well as I said, supportive services for tenants. The property will be managed and supported by Avalon Housing. There will be publicly available electric vehicle charging stations with capability for additional ones.
But I'm incredibly excited about the progress on this project.
The development agreement was approved unanimously. Council considered final approval for the rezoning of 45 parcels at Plymouth and Green Road to Transit Corridor District. Earlier in the meeting, residents offered comments in a public hearing.
But the problem is that with this zoning stretching from US 23 down to about the Broadway Bridge and covering the Plymouth Road area in between, high-rise buildings along that northern rim of Plymouth Road will create shadows that will go deep into the residential areas, into all of the areas, but specifically my concern is with the residential areas along Plymouth Road.
I just want to know that the city has a plan to potentially integrate greenery or offset some of the lost plant space in those zoned areas in future developments. I also know that TC-1 does not permit fueling stations, at least last that I checked. I understand that non-conforming structures will be permitted to keep operating up until they are interrupted. Are there concerns, either in the short term or the long term, that, as far as I can tell, the only gas stations in Ann Arbor north of the Huron River are within the zones that are being changed?
And actually, I would contend with my neighbor that 5 to 8 stories is too short. I think you should build them all and build them tall.
My name is David Lyon, and I'm here representing Concordia University and the nursing school that's located at 3475 Plymouth Road. But I'm here to ask the City Council that at some point in the near future, they would consider an amendment to actually include our property in that zoning.
The definition of a transit corridor in the city is so vague as to apply to almost any city, any street where a bus goes. But when you look at TC-1 and how it's been applied across the city and how many hundreds and hundreds of properties have been applied to TC-1 and this next set also, it makes me wonder if there's any point in anyone participating in the comprehensive plan review that's supposedly underway right now.
I'm so happy to see this happening in other places around town, and I hope that you pass it tonight, and I hope to see the Washtenaw corridor come up pretty quickly so we can see that go through as well.
I just can't see a way that there would be any appreciable amount of shadow from these buildings going on to other properties.
Council made statements in support for about 10 minutes.
Now, to date, 258 parcels covering about 400 acres have been rezoned to TC1. It's a pretty big accomplishment. This proposed rezoning would add 45 more parcels over 127 acres.
Even the schools are looking for future into trying to figure out how to meet ongoing early childhood childcare demands for young families in this area. If we can build housing along here where it's walkable to schools, to transit, to shopping, to businesses, this is a bonus for our community.
We're not making a worse city, we're working on making a better city. And we also know that people who work in Ann Arbor ought to be able to live in Ann Arbor. That is what we're looking to accomplish by TC-1 zoning.
Council unanimously approved the rezoning of 127 acres at Plymouth and Green. Council considered final approval for zoning changes that will expand the categories of uses permitted in mixed-use and office zoning districts. At a public hearing, one resident spoke out.
First, I think folks need to know that some of the things that have happened in the last couple of years have been initiated not by this body, by council, but by business people in our community who have ties to this council in at least in as much as they have made large donations to campaigns of the council members and the mayor. This happens to be one of those. This was written specifically to open up some uses in Oxford properties. And so we know that office, an allowed use in office is residential, right? So without this body doing anything to enrich development, you could simply be encouraging alternative uses.
In discussion, Council Liaison to the Planning Commission, Lisa Dish, introduced it.
The staff report notes that that office has been steadily evolving into a complete mixed-use district, and our zoning changes will help the UDC keep up with that evolution. Yes, the most significant of these changes adds banquet hall to our zoning code, but it also it proposes additional amendments to the office district to align its permitted uses with those of mixed uses generally.
The ordinance changes were approved unanimously. Council considered final approval for an ordinance amendment to permit ground-mounted solar arrays in residential front and backyards, subject to the same standards as other accessory structures. At a public hearing, residents offered comments in support.
From an aesthetic perspective, moving it to the front yard makes it more visible. And that in turn is going to inspire more homeowners to make it presentable. And in turn, that's also going to start inspiring those who manufacture solar infrastructure, focusing on aesthetics.
I was kind of sad when we banned these and decided that we didn't want them, thought they were ugly or whatever. You know, a lot of people don't even really use their front yard for anything. It's just kind of empty space.
A previous council considered this issue with input from residents and advice from city staff. In 2017, then council members Zach Ackerman, Julie Grand, and current mayor Christopher Taylor sponsored a temporary moratorium on the placement of solar panels in front yards. In 2017, city staff studied the regulation of solar arrays in other communities and made a recommendation to council that they be permitted in front yards with requirements for screening. At first reading, then Council Liaison to the Planning Commission, Zach Ackerman, referred to public engagement and offered an amendment.
2 of the 3 meetings were overwhelmingly against allowing ground-mounted solar panels in front yards. With that feedback, staff has suggested council move in one of 2 directions, the first being accepting the ordinance as written. If that's the direction council would like to move, I think that there are some practical changes we can make and consider, although I would rather council move in the second direction, which is to deny ground-mounted solar panels in front yards.
At second reading, he further explained.
There are some natural next steps that we as a council have to make a priority, and me as a council member will. I think one is in short order trying to figure out a way to approach accessory structures in front yards. I believe it to be one of those small pieces of our zoning code that puts a lot of the character of our neighborhoods at risk.
The change considered this week was approved and recommended by the City Planning Commission over a year ago in December 2022. Council discussed the ordinance change for about 2 minutes.
I want to underscore the urgency and significance of this change, because if you think back to our energy options report, we learned about a gap between the amount of clean energy that can be generated in Ann Arbor and the amount of energy that we are consuming and will consume even more of soon.
Council unanimously approved the amendment that will allow the placement of ground-mounted solar panels in front yards without any requirement for screening. Council considered final approval for an amendment to the city's non-discrimination ordinance that will apply to city contractors. The change will prohibit city contractors from asking job applicants about past criminal records prior to a conditional offer of employment. At a public hearing, one resident offered comment.
Well, I think this is an excellent idea. I hope you all pass it.
Council discussed it for less than 5 minutes.
This would apply only to future contracts and future hires of contractors. It applies only to those employees performing work under the contracts with the city, and it applies only to contracts over $25,000 related to goods, services, and construction.
These are things that we should be supporting with our tax dollars as a city when we hire city contractors.
It is crucial that we do what we can here by our participation in the market in this way.
Council unanimously approved the amendment to the non-discrimination ordinance. Council considered an ordinance amendment that will remove requirements for a buffer between conflicting land uses. Staff offered explanation.
When you had a non-residential use adjacent to a residential use, regardless of the zoning designation, and that will change. If you happen to have any type of residential, but it's in a mixed-use district, say an office district or a local commercial or any type of C district, there will not have to be a conflicting land use buffer against that. And the final thing that we are changing, currently there is a buffer that is required when you have residential use in an R3 or R4 district adjacent to residential. So, and this is what we're changing. We are removing that. We are not requiring residential to buffer from residential.
Council unanimously approved the ordinance change at first reading. At a future meeting, it will be the subject of a public hearing and vote for final approval. Council considered the hiring of a new executive director for the Downtown Development Authority. Maura Thompson will be the third director of the DDA since 2020. Earlier in the meeting, a public commenter spoke about the DDA.
It's been 16 months since a young man named Lucas found a gap in the chain link fencing lining the roof of a city-owned DDA-managed parking structure and jumped to his death. 6 days later, this council passed a resolution urging the DDA to install improved safety barriers in city garages. 6 of those 11 votes came from current council members. Please ask lots of probing questions about why it is taking so long for something to happen to protect our young people. There have been 9 suicides from city structures in the past 8 years. You have the ultimate authority over the DDA and its structures. Please exercise that responsibility to ensure that after all these years and all those tragedies, city-owned structures will no longer serve as platforms of death.
Council responded.
I think that's a conversation better left to a different discussion. For now, I just wanted to also reiterate how impressed I've been with Ms. Thompson.
So I'm really thrilled that she's willing to step up and take this job, and I think that our DDA and the team she's built there is strong under her leadership.
Maura Thompson was unanimously approved as the new director of the DDA. Finally, after a brief introduction, Council unanimously approved the recognition of Lubny, Ukraine as a sister city for the city of Ann Arbor. The meeting adjourned before 9 p.m. For more details about this meeting, visit A2Council.com.
Welcome to this week's A2Council Moment of Zen.
Absences are actually rather common, and here, for a long time, our council was populated by people who were retirees or not otherwise gainfully employed, and this is a council that has a lot going on.